The name John Weitz is usually attached to chic menswear and to subtle advertising. More about that later. But the same John Weitz is also a best-selling author, a lifelong student of Nazi Germany. His latest book is Hitler's Diplomat, The Life and Times of Joachim. Say it in German.
Joachim.
Von Ribbentrop. It's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome. Yeah. Tell me first about, before we get into this, now everybody wants me to ask you about these ads that are on the back of the buses in Manhattan.
They are very non-specific, absolute nonsense. The brief to the agency over all these years, the same agency for 40 years, is Amuse New Yorkers and see if the name might get mentioned. That's just about all.
Yeah.
And occasionally somebody balls me out because they said they got too close in their car, banged the back of the bus.
Because they were reading them?
Exactly,
Yes.
for God's sake. So
just give me an example of one of them in case people around the country
Well,
don't
there's
want
one
to go.
right now that runs and says, who forgot to put his name in this ad? That's all. And then there was one recently that said, it worked.
Yeah.
What? The John Weitz tie. Well, nobody knows what it did. Might have killed a gangster, might have, you know.
Yeah, but see, I assume it's effective advertising because we're talking about it at this very moment.
Of course, that is the idea.
That is the point.
Don't forget, I'm very lucky. My two biggest competitor in that field, which I'm not too daily active in, have both been dead for over 35 years.
Who are they?
Dior and Chanel.
In terms of...
They make much more money than I do. They're pushing daisies.
Chanel
Yes.
had an affair
Yes.
during World War II
Yes.
with a senior Gestapo official, correct?
Indeed she did. She was in Paris during the occupation, and she had an affair with, it is said, and usually accepted, the foreign intelligence head of the Gestapo, General Schellenberg. And she holed up with him at the Ritz Hotel at her flat for many, many weeks, and appeared only to relieve herself of some very anti-Semitic statements from time to time. She did much business with the Germans, but the company, in effect, is financed by Jews.
And did she pay any price for that after the war was over?
Yes, there were a lot of people who seemed to be upset with her for a while. She didn't get back into the fashion business until quite a while after the war. But she was great and wonderful and marvelous and talented, and she is forgiven, I suppose, as a name. She's
By
dead
you?
now.
Would you forgive her? Even though
I have learned not to condemn. I really haven't.
Take you back to 1938, a little bit about, you were in school in London in 1938. Your parents were wise enough and had sufficient resources and sufficient premonition as to what was going to take place in Germany to leave. They came to the United States. You then went back to the war and served with the OSS, right?
Yes, through a long way. I arrived in America in 1942, and joined the Army, actually in 41, excuse me, just before the war broke out, joined the Army, and then out of plain soldiering was drafted into the intelligence service and did some work with them.
What does that mean, did some work with them?
Well,
Behind
I suppose
enemy
it's technically
lines, or do you
described.
analyze
Well,
documents, or?
I was one of the many, many people who tried to establish contact with the then German resistance movement, which at that time, particularly in 1944, when I got to work, was in the hands of a group of young officers headed by a man called von Stauffenberg.
Right, I've read there's a book about that, and I've read a film about it, and a lot of other books, and he was assassinated because
On the 20th of July 1944, he attempted to assassinate Hitler. It failed miserably. There were 42 attempts on Hitler's life.
Yeah.
This was only one. Thousands of young officers and their families
How
got
did
hanged.
you try to make contact with him? I mean, what was the means that you tried to make contact? Did you go behind German lines? Were you there in Germany? What did you do?
It is not fair at this point of the game really to attempt to give the details of that. The fact is that there were a whole group of young German officers who very much wanted live bodies to reach. And they started out in England. You know, there were a whole series of German officers who came to England first.
Does flowing out of this come this book? Because
Not at all, no. This book comes out of my own interest in Germany as a great country, and the fact that Berlin, my hometown, was very much like New York, still is. And in the 1930s, Berlin was very much like the 1980s New York. And I remember sending an outline on this book to Tom Wolfe,
right.
who said, I want to do the foreword. He said, because we're talking about radical chic. The fact is that the business of conservatism, right-wing conservatism, was very fashionable in Germany in the 1930s, late 20s and 30s, among the upper strata. And that the Nazis took advantage of many, many people who were very highly placed and of very good families to advance the cause of right-wing conservatism, which was radical chic on the other corner.
Essentially, they were the radical chic. Tom Wolfe wrote about it in New York Magazine. Was the fact that people like Leonard Bernstein and others gave parties for members of the Black Panther Party in the 1960s, right?
Yes, it was the business of saying, come and meet some real-life revolutionaries.
And what you do in Berlin, they'd say, members of the establishment in Berlin would say, come and meet some real-life Nazis.
Exactly. They were revolutionaries on either end. Now, Ribbentrop was one of the very few Nazis at the top who wasn't the sort of psychopathic soul who followed Hitler. He was the fellow in the next Concord seat.
Yeah.
He had a lovely home, country home, attractive children, played tennis, loved playing golf.
Kind of guy wear John Weitz clothes, right?
God, no. He had a good tailor.
All right. So then you go.
He had the same tailor as my father's.
He was. You know why? I'm telling you on the phone. The reason this fascinated me is because my father, and you told me.
Tell me about that.
My father, who I wish that is dead and died in 1990. You told me the story. He was in the Battle of the Bulge.
Yes.
And he captured, along with some other people, and I'm not sure what, one of von Ribbentrop's castles.
Really?
And he told me about it. And they found this fascinating wine cellar there. And I think they drank wine for 2 days.
I'll believe it.
And you said to me that I thought he probably only had one castle.
Well, there were a series of places that were frequently requisitioned, not by these men themselves, but by people for them. Don't forget, this was the foreign minister.
Right.
He was a man of extreme importance, so there were a lot of sycophantic people who said, here, why don't you use this, Your Excellency?
He was a very ambitious guy.
He was.
A real sort of mover and shaker, allied himself with people who could influence his career.
Absolutely.
1932, he goes to meet Hitler.
Yes.
He is there to persuade Hitler to join a coalition or something.
Yes.
And what ends up is Hitler persuades him what?
That was one of the curious things. Hitler had the capacity of persuading one man or 10,000 men face to face of his particular right point of view. It was an astonishing thing that happened. Now, very often it happened with men who themselves were weak and very confused. In the case of von Ribbentrop, that's not too clear. Von Ribbentrop was ambitious, but how he was persuaded, no one can tell. And he himself, in his memoir, simply says, I suddenly realized that this was the answer for Germany. Now, it is crushing to understand that men of that social level, of that caliber, of that sophistication, traveled worldwide,
and
fully
Hitler
knowledgeable.
had hardly ever, as you point out, been outside of Germany except with conquering armies.
Absolutely. That is the story that I tell in this book, how it is possible for the man on the next Concord seat to make a deal with the revolutionaries. And many, many people made deals with revolutionaries, got on that tiger and couldn't get off. It started out when somebody, a friend of Ribbentrop's, said to Adolf Hitler, who complained that he said, I wish somebody could read me the London newspapers, the Paris newspapers. Somebody said, I have a man like that. Well, the next thing was that Hitler became an advisor. And from advisor, he became an extra advisor, a special plenipotentiary, a man who went out to make deals for Hitler. As a matter of fact, one of the most famous treaties of the time, which was the British-German Naval Agreement, in which Germany agreed to build only 33% of the tonnage of warships, out of which came pocket battleships, by the way, was made by Ribbentrop, who sat down with the British Foreign Office and talked to them as if he were a businessman.
Yeah, but Molotov later said some disparaging things about him.
Yes.
Which was what?
Oh, well, Molotov said, if we'd known what a fool the German minister was. The fact is that Molotov made a deal. The fact is that Stalin made a deal with Germany. As you know, the Russians and the Germans had a very important non-aggression pact which made it possible for Hitler to go to war. In the middle sat Poland, and the Poles had convinced the British that they could defend themselves, not to worry.
What did he know about the Holocaust?
I don't believe that anyone who wasn't within the tiny little body of the Gestapo knew a great deal about the actual plans for the elimination of Jews. At that time,
The foreign minister
was
know.
like anyone else. He was no intimate of Heydrich's or of Himmler's.
Right.
They were friends, but not intimates. And don't forget, the entire thing was dressed up in euphemism. This was removal, resettlement, special treatment, labor camps, reproportionment. The word killing was never used. The whole thing took place, as you know, the final solution, as it was called, was one of many steps. The first solution was to get rid of people. The last one, the final one, was to do away with them. That was all agreed to in a great conference at a horrible, charming place called Wannsee, a beautiful resort.
What did Hitler think of Ribbentrop? Or as he once said, von Ribbentrop.
Hitler was quite convinced at first that Ribbentrop was a very worldly and charming man who would be of great help to him. He was then convinced that Ribbentrop's ways were the right ways for the time. He was happy when Ribbentrop made the deals for him that he wanted, and when Hitler wanted to go to war, he had no further use for Ribbentrop, but kept him respectfully there.
Ribbentrop used to get upset because Goebbels would announce the invasion rather than allowing the foreign minister to announce it.
Yes, there was a great deal of pecking order, pejorative nonsense that went on. The Nazis were a very disorganized bunch, all in all. They weren't
And a
quite
lot of petty jealousies as to who had the favor of the king and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. He lived through the war, and then he's tried at Nuremberg, and he is convicted.
Yes.
But somebody goes to the cell and talks to him, and he says, what about Hitler?
He says, if he came into my cell today, I would do exactly as he asks. Because he was simply a devoted disciple. He was the original paladin of them all.
Did he say that simply because he knew he was going to be shot anyway, or hanged, I guess?
No,
Or did he say that
firmly
because he
convinced.
believed that somehow?
He believed.
To the end.
To the end. And many, many of the men who were on the dock in Nuremberg did not. All of them claimed they didn't know, they had nothing to do with it, and told Hitler not to do this, told Hitler not to do that.
Save their skin.
Save their skins. Probably the arch criminal of them in the dock was Goering, who eventually cheated the hangman. Yes.
Yeah, who had the cyanide thing in his tooth or something.
Nobody knows where. That's one of the great mysteries. Though.
It wasn't necessarily a cap in his tooth.
Not necessarily.
Hitler's diplomat, John Weitz. Come back sometime. Pleasure to have you on the
Happy
podcast.
to.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all of you for joining us tonight. Tomorrow night, Washington lawyer turned biblical scholar Herschel Shanks reveals some of the mystery and the controversy surrounding the Dead Sea Scrolls. That and much more tomorrow night. Thank you for being with us tonight at this special time, 11:30. We'll see you again tomorrow night.